Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to start with our session. The first session for the second day of the Annual Business Summit 2024. May I request all of you to please settle down. May I request everybody to please sit down. नहीं है. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming all our esteemed guests for this session. For this morning, the first session for Day 2 Annual Business Summit 2024. Future of Competitive India. Should India have an integrated trade, investment and industrial policy? Promises to be a very interesting session. And for this we have with us secretaries from the Government of India. May I request Mr. Banerjee? CB, may I request you to please take over?
Welcome back to the session, and we are starting 5 minutes ahead of time this session so that we get a little bit more time for discussion. The session, as you know, is focused on should India have an integrated trade, investment and industrial policy and the future of a competitive India. And this is one session that every year we look forward to, a session which is with our Government of India secretaries. It's always great to have this type of a panel in our annual session, and it's with a lot of pleasure and honor we welcome Shri R.K. Singh, the Secretary, Department of Promotion of Industrial, DPIIT, which is Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. Mr. Damu Ravi, Secretary ER of the Ministry of External Affairs. Ms. Sumita Daura, the Secretary, Ministry of Labour and Employment, and Mr. T.K. Ramachandran, the Secretary, Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways of the Government of India. The way we have structured it, we'll get industry perspectives from some thoughts from our President, Mr. R. Dinesh, and thereafter we'll have comments from the panel of secretaries present with us here, and I'm sure that we have our audience to ask a few questions to this very, very high-powered panel. So without much ado, may I request Dinesh, President CII, to give his perspectives and remarks, please.
Thank you, CB. Secretaries, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I actually wanted to touch upon two specific points, and of course the agenda itself voices that, as to how are we going to integrate our trade, investment and industrial policy. As we look at today's scenario, we actually see more and more of effort being made in most of the global economies in terms of, I would call it, an inward focus on making sure that either investment comes in or is linked with, if I can use that word, industrial policy efforts to make sure manufacturing is localized and services are localized. When it comes to dealing with specific countries, and during all of our visits in CII, we have heard very clearly that there is a need to make sure that both at the center and the states, we have an ability to integrate this approach and what is in India's interest, as well as the requirement for manufacturing and of course services also to prosper by bringing this. Is the solution going to be to integrate, or is the solution going to be more such agreements as has been signed with EFTA, where we are integrating both investments and the policy together in terms of approach towards the FTA? Further, as we look at going forward, we do believe that there will be many non-trade barriers which we may have to circumvent, especially with the developed countries of the world. So in that background, we may also need to look at our outward investments in the same manner and see how do we make it happen in a more organized way, linking that with also the number of jobs which we create in those countries where our investment goes. That's one point. The second point is, as we continue to focus on our infrastructure development and also the funding need for that infrastructure, I think we will have to make sure that we look at what are all the tools we have to facilitate that in a better manner possible. And here, I think we can't have a better set of, I would call it, minds to talk about how are we going to look at integrating the data which we have within the Government of India itself. And especially if I look at data which is coming through portals like the PM Gati Shakti program, and utilization of that for making investors aware of where they will need to use that or put the money, and make sure they have the comfort that the speed of projects is not getting delayed. And again, I'm speaking about this not at the central level alone, but across all the states. Therefore, I think today's discussion will be very useful to, as we shape our agenda, not just for the next 2-3 years, but look at the future of a developed India at 100. So I'm really looking forward to these discussions, and I'm sure the minds on this table will share their thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. Thank you for those setting the context, if I may say. And, in the morning during the business session of the annual general meeting of CII, Dinesh and others referred a lot to the B20 and the outcomes. And a person who has been guiding us constantly during the B20 and I do not know whether with a lot of anxiety or with a lot of comfort, I don't know with what he did, but he did give us a lot of guidance, as Mr. R.K. Singh, during the entire course of the B20 process. He was like a rock behind us to see to it that it went off well. And, as I come to request him to speak, we have been working with him on various aspects, and what from Dinesh just mentioned, about the industrial corridor projects under the National Industrial Corridor program, how that can be, we spoke about that too during the course of this conference, be integrated with the SEZs, the dedicated freight corridors, industrial parks, and also the National Manufacturing and Investment Zone. So that was one piece that we were all discussing, and I'm sure he will talk to us. There is the success of the PLI scheme that was again much discussed and deliberated upon. And again, when we talk about it, and what Dinesh mentioned about employment during the last, yesterday and today, how does some things like labor-intensive sectors also come into that? The third piece has been also the e-commerce policy, as we all know, that's on the anvil. And so how does that really fit into what the subject of this particular discussion is? Again, another area, if I may say, the Secretary is saying, one of the things that we have been talking, we've seen this EFTA, which was signed with that huge bias towards investment in jobs. So the agreement is the first of its kind in many ways. So going forward, do we see more such trade agreements which would be having that positive, strong bias towards inward investment? So those were areas that we have been deliberating, and it's great to have you with us, Mr. R.K. Singh. And may I now request you to give your opening remarks and comments on some of the thoughts which could resonate with these discussions taking place here.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee, Mr. Dinesh, my colleagues, Mr. Damu Ravi, and Ms. Sumita Davra, Mr. T.K. Ramachandran, business leaders from across India. Let me start by saying that I'm delighted to sort of attend this annual business summit of CII. I've been talking to CII quite a bit, addressing many of your sort of meetings and seminars. And at some stage, I start thinking whether I can say anything new when I come to these kind of programs. The intent is today to speak a little bit extemporaneously, not too much of prepared remarks. I'll discuss in general the topic that has been mentioned, which is, should we have an integrated trade, investment, and industrial policy? How do we do that under our system of government? When the fragmentation of portfolios is a reality, and probably it is above my pay grade to really talk about integration of ministries. So really we need to focus on how we get it done within this system of government that we have, so that government policies in different sectors are complementary and reinforce each other and at least don't undercut each other. And I think our system does provide for that, but I'll come to that a little later. At the start, let me say that in 2012, we were at number 11 in the world GDP rankings. Today, we are at number 5, jumping 6 places. It is, it is inevitable that we'll go on to the number 3 position in the next 2 to 3 years. There is also not much doubt that we are at a tipping point in our history when we are perhaps on the back of sustained growth rates in a position to regain our historical share in global trade and investment, which used to be, 200 years back, there are the figures that I talked about at 27%. Right now, we contribute just about 8% of the world's GDP, while housing almost 17% of the world's population. Long way to go, but there's no doubt that under this government, the takeoff point has been reached through its combination of huge, unparalleled levels of investment in infrastructure, both physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure, by providing from a rate of about 1.7% of our GDP going through public sector capital formation to nearly 3.2% of the GDP today, which is translating itself into the roads and expressways and new airports that you are seeing around you. That is really triggering the momentum in our growth story. There's not much doubt about that. From the private sector, we are hoping that they will also come forward now with significant announcements as well. Some of them I've started seeing in the papers, and I'm sure more must be underway to take advantage of this unparalleled investment that the government is making through its focus on both physical and digital infrastructure. I want to also say, I want to get back to that point about having an integrated trade and investment and industrial policy. Now, in our system of government, I don't expect, a packaged integrated policy to come through, both because of the fact that we have some of these issues are obviously in the domain of the states as well. But we do have a system where major policy decisions invariably involve tremendous degree of cross-ministerial consultations, particularly in Government of India, and it is generally ensured that policies are sort of complementary and reinforce each other, don't undercut each other. If you see the broad trends in our policy, what is there? I think there is a focus across the board, both at the center and the state level, across party lines on some things like ease of doing business. That's not a buzzword, it's part of the lexicon for politicians as well. The World Bank had given up on the EODB rankings. Incidentally, they are restarting it this year, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But we continued that through our subnational ranking system, what we call the business reform action plans. And it is really has been the trigger for a lot of the reforms that you see at the state levels, whether it is in terms of online building permits or online water connections and power connections, whether it is movement made in terms of property titling being brought online, at least in some of the southern states, or whether it is in terms of ensuring that basic public services of different types are delivered online in a transparent manner. So, integration of policy is not a matter of packaging and presentation. What matters is how you sort of deliver it. And as I said, I think our system does deliver that. Other sort of trend that you would have seen in our policy in the last few years has been a trend towards liberalization in FDI. You saw that we probably have one of the most liberal open sky FDI policies in the world, more liberal than many of the Southeast Asian countries with whom we often compare, their economic performances. And most recently, we delivered on liberalizing our FDI norms in space. And it is quite possible that under a new government, we can attempt some further liberalization of any pockets that are left where some liberalization is possible. I want to spend a couple of minutes on the production-linked incentive scheme because that's obviously the centerpiece of our industrial policy now. And it's also the centerpiece of industrial policy around the world now, in the sense that every country around the world which used to lecture to us about tariffs and subsidies being distortionary, they're all in the subsidy and tariff game, with a lot of vigor, and really not in a position to lecture us anymore. But when it comes to PLI, the results have been very, very good. If you see in terms of sheer numbers, we've so far created almost 1.13 lakh crores of investment, over 9 lakh crores of sales, over 8 lakhs of employment, and exports of 3.45 lakh crores, particularly through the contribution of sectors like large-scale electronics manufacturing, pharma, food processing, telecom, and other products. The criticism that PLI sometimes faces is because for every critic, the critic has a different perspective on what success means. So some will say that, okay, mobiles are doing well, but where is the domestic value addition? Ignoring the fact that DVA takes time, but it has delivered tremendously in terms of, for example, employment. The kind of employment it has created in Tamil Nadu, particularly for women workforce, is amazing. I mean, it's and that part is left out. Similarly, in other sectors, in semiconductors, for example, when we've made these large investments and the private sector has come forward, and one of our industrial corridor towns, Dholera, is where one of those large chip plants is coming. Then the discussion is that it's too capital incentive is not suitable for India, and why is it's not labor intensive enough. Losing sight of the fact that there the target is not labor intensity or employment. The target is really strategic autonomy and ensuring that we don't become over dependent on insecure supply chains. I want to spend a couple of minutes on ease of doing business because that's an area where we focused on. DPIIT does a lot of work in that area. Right now, we are focused on this new World Bank ranking for which the survey will start in August this year. That involves a new set of indices which will cover both ease of entry, ease of operation, and ease of exit of businesses. The World Bank has shared a set of 1,370 questions which will be assessed across various economies. Our survey starts in September. DPIIT, along with various ministries, is hard at work in trying to sort of first assess the as-is situation and thereafter see whether we can make some quick reforms in certain areas to ensure that our overall performance improves. Because at the end of the day, these global rankings, despite their shortcomings, and sometimes in 2019 there was allegation that it was being gamed by China. Despite that, they have a signaling effect for foreign investors in particular, and we need to sort of ensure that we don't regress and we do continue to improve when it comes to those rankings. DPIIT is also working hard on this, on Jan Vishwas 2. Jan Vishwas 1, you will remember, we got passed last year. 183 provisions were decriminalized. We are, based on inputs from industry associations, including CII, we are working on the second edition of what may be a continuing process, because I think over time we will have to do several rounds of this exercise to really eliminate some of the vexatious and penal provisions that are unfriendly for business. Finally, I want to end by saying that DPIIT's one of its roles is also to work on our ensuring that our intellectual property right regime improves. And I'm happy to report to you today that we've now created a situation where our patent regime is meeting or getting close to global benchmarks in terms of patent examination time and approvals. The number of patents granted has gone up to an all-time high this year. 1 lakh patents for the first time, a 17-fold increase from just 5,978 in 2014-15 to 1,03,000 in 23-24. A lot of it is, from Indian entrepreneurs and from startups, which is obviously a great thing. I want to also end by talking a little bit about, PLI scheme is one way of, triggering investment, but there are other ways which need not involve the budgetary outlays. One of those is tariff policy itself, and that is an area which I wanted to discuss very briefly, because you would have seen it in our recent announcement of the EV policy, where we've simply tried to use tariff policy and tweaks as a way of triggering performance commitments from manufacturers without actually having to spend money there. The response is, I'm sure, everybody talks about one company, but we are expecting responses from many companies to that policy. And or at a smaller scale, we try to do something similar with in the area of tire manufacturing, where two major multinationals came to us with certain products that were on the restricted list. And they wanted to be allowed to import those products, and we told them that, okay, we'll allow you to import, but we want these product lines manufactured in India. Once they gave us that commitment, and they were happy to do so, we allowed that relaxation. So what I'm saying is that there are other ways of ensuring that the kind of goals that we have under the PLI scheme for investments and exports can be met even by prudent use of tariff policies, as well as non-tariff policies such as QCOs, which we used very strategically. For example, for the toy sector, the use of the QCO norms essentially froze off our market for Chinese and enabled a re-flourishing and growth of our domestic toy industry. There was a mention about FTAs. So yeah, I mean, India for the first time has been able to negotiate an FTA with an investment commitment from a group of developed countries. Basically, this was based on the premise that their markets are so small that there's nothing much they can offer us in terms of market access. Whereas obviously our market is huge and growing. So what is it that they could offer? And they, after a long drawn-out set of negotiations, agreed to make fairly significant and quite binding unilateral commitments on investment. Those commitments are going to be monitored, and there is a provision even to claw back the market access if those commitments are not met. So I think that's a bit of a game changer. I'm sure there are a whole bunch of other FTA negotiations that are currently underway, and my own anticipation is that we are going to, you will see India becoming a little less conservative when it comes to these FTAs. And I think all of you as an industry should prepare yourselves for a lower tariff regime in the long run. Of course, while doing so, I think you have every right to expect that any distortionary and any inversion in our tax regimes should be corrected. I know that there are many commodities where both on the GST side and on the customs duty side, we continue to have inverted kind of duty structures which affect our competitiveness and affect our export capabilities. That is another area where DPIIT is doing a cross-sectoral study to ensure that both in the GST Council and through the Finance Ministry, we try to rationalize and ensure that those inversions are removed as to improve the competitiveness of our manufacturing sector. Those were the kind of policy sort of trade-offs that I wanted to cover today. I look forward to your questions, and I look forward also to engaging with all of you on this broader issue of ease of doing business, decriminalization of our various economic laws, so to make it even more friendly and make it even easier for you to do business in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for that presentation. And you alluded to a number of subjects that we raised just before you spoke, and you've really covered those the areas that we look forward to a deeper engagement as we come in. But you did mention towards the end about the tariff, which gives me a great segue to get into our next speaker, the Secretary ER, Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Damu Ravi, again a gentleman with whom we have worked for decades on many, many issues. And I know that our engagement with him on the topic of integration of policies have been very, very engaging, and you have suggested many roadmaps for such an integration. And today it would be good to hear with you, especially from when Secretary Industry spoke about tariff rationalization, or the tariff playing a key role. Then again, there are issues of like friendshoring, which is a concept which has gained traction so much worldwide. And what are the measures that can be undertaken really by us as a country, and to be a trusted partner in the GVC development, and as an alternative source for or a hub for quality products. And that's something again which was in the discussions during the course of this meeting. So I leave it to you, Mr. Damu Ravi, to cover some of the areas that we have been engaging on a one-to-one for several months and years. Please, Mr.
Well, good morning to all of you. And at the outset, Chandrajit Banerjee, my old friend, Mr. Dinesh, RK, my batchmate and a dear friend, Sumitra Davra, Secretary Labor, Mr. Ramchandran. Well, at the outset, let me sincerely express my deep gratitude and appreciation for giving me this opportunity to be here today. It's truly an honor because I know CII over the years, I've been participating in such events as the ability and power to bring a galaxy of industry representatives, academia, think tanks, and policymakers under one roof. Also, I'd like to congratulate Mr. Dinesh for your successful stewardship of the CII for more than a year. As you demit office today, this position, thank you very much, and it's nice to be knowing you. Well, today's topic is very important and extremely pertinent at a time when we are looking at India's growth trajectory to significant heights. Of course, 5 trillion is a desirable goal and it's eminently doable. But how do we reach there? I think RK has already mentioned, given some few important ideas, but I think we also have to first understand the importance of developing the ecosystem of competitiveness. I think for any country on a higher trajectory of growth, it has to develop this competitiveness of an ecosystem so that it's able to position globally much stronger. I know for a long time, and being in the government for this many years, for 3 decades and more, we've always felt that policies are made in silos. And that's been what has been the trend in the past. But that has changed quite significantly in the recent times. So we're more of interministerial consultations, intensive and more frequent consultations are enabling at the policy level a much more deeper understanding of what the industry needs. Especially events like this interaction with industry is even more crucial to understand the pulse of the industry, what it needs, and then you are able to frame the policies that are industry friendly, and it's a two-way interaction. One is to understand the industry, but also to educate the industry, what is out there, and how do you become more competitive on the global space. So learning from each other, it's an important element. We also need to not only learn from within, but also learn from outside India, how other countries are managing and how other countries' policies are being framed, keeping this in view. So the age of working in silos in the government is over, and I think that's a very important thing. Now, when I say industry focusing, industries facilitating them to become global, but I think the trust also needs to come from the industry also. Because for a very long time, the domestic space and domestic market has been so closely guarded by the industry. I know that's a very important part of it. But out there, the global market is even larger, and even larger pie, in which we need to focus upon. So at the policy level, this understanding of the importance of the global markets has to sink in. And I think this is an ongoing process. And why I say this is so important? Because trade is not an activity happening in isolation. It will never happen. We have to understand the concept of the trade itself. The trade today has to be seen in a more integrated manner. Trade, goods, investments, services, industry, manufacturing are all so integrated. And in more recent times, we're beginning to see this finances, technology, and e-commerce are also very critical in the way we see trade evolving, which is why the free trade agreements become important. And within the free trade agreements, what countries are looking at is actually more ambitious free trade agreements. If you look at the bilateral FTAs with Japan or Korea, which are CEPA, Comprehensive Economic Partnership, you have all these chapters within that FTAs. So that is the point I'm trying to emphasize here is how do you see trade as a more holistic and integrated economic activity? That brings us to the next idea of global value chains. I think in the last few years, there has been a better appreciation within the government and in the industry how the global value chains operate. Mr. Banerjee mentioned about nearshoring and friendshoring. I think both concepts are very important, but they operate at different levels and for different products. So integration, global value chains, the regional value chains are very important if you want to engage in a competitive manufacturing environment. If you want to make your product more competitive, this is important. But if you are looking at a very specific product of importance of a high technology, then friendshoring is important. And that is why the concept of resilient supply chains is becoming even more significant in these days. So as industry moves out of India, we will see greater number of mergers and acquisitions taking place. Manufacturing happening outside of India, driven by Indian companies. And this is not that because we want to make it happen. This is natural. As the economy grows into $1 trillion, $5 trillion GDP, this industry will also grow commensurate with the way the economic activity will create that opportunities. Today, and that's a very well-established fact, while we see $900 billion coming into India as a cumulative investment, FDIs, but what is not known to many of us in the industry circle and in the government too, is 300 billions of FDIs have been invested by Indian companies outside of India. And I'm just trying to emphasize the fact that in commensurate with the rise of an economy, the external engagement will also enhance. And that's what exactly happening with the industry today. So how do I position the Atmanirbhar Bharat? Also, Rajesh has mentioned about the PLI scheme. So you need to know that as your PLI becomes successful, as your Atmanirbhar Bharat becomes successful, you also need to plug in externally very strong. And that's where I see immense opportunities, not only within India, but also in the neighborhood, but also in countries like Africa. And this is an important element we need to focus, and industry need to bring that idea into the policy making as well. Now let's look at some of the constraining factors in the way competitiveness needs to be analyzed. And one of which is the logistics. I mean, the Secretary of Shipping is here today, and he would vouch for it. Our logistic costs are perhaps one of the world's highest, at 12 to 14%. Of course, Mr. Dinesh is in the business of it, he knows very well. And the global average of developed economies and emerging economies is just about 6 to 8%. So there's a lot of work ahead for us, and already so much of is already happening in the government. Of course, India being such a big country, this process will take time. But we need to keep in mind the importance of the logistic costs coming down in the days to come. The other important factor is actually technology. Technology enhances competitiveness for any product. So if you want to move up the chain in value chain, you need to infuse technology in your manufacturing. And this is already happening. Increasingly, the artificial intelligence, the DPI on which the government is focusing so much, the digital public infrastructure, the Internet of Things, the blockchain technologies will help in bringing efficiencies and competitiveness in the way we manufacture. Of course, the debate will also move into another area, which is the skilled labor availability, the upgrading and upskilling and reskilling. Those are the issues that need to be addressed. And I know here Secretary Labor is already here, and there's been a lot of discussion happening within the government and in the interministerial context. The last item I'd like to close here and is the importance of the economic diplomacy in the whole activity of your competitiveness. That is, the Ministry of External Affairs has created a division of economic diplomacy directly under me. And our effort has always been to bring in our missions, 180 missions that we have abroad, both embassies and the consulates and high commissions put together. So we're trying to create a network of missions and the ministry working along with the whole of government to ensure that the industry is well facilitated, issues of the industry are addressed. And today, I talk to ambassadors or high commissioners, they don't say, oh, don't send another business delegation, it's too much work. But they're actually saying, when are you sending another business delegation? And I'm so happy to hear with my colleagues, often I talk on the VC and they keep saying, let's plan another visit. So this sensitization and their own understanding of the importance of India's economic rise is growing. And we would like to be very accommodating, facilitating all the industry issues. Whenever you are going, please write to us and we will be there to help you. So ultimately, our objective should be not just selling goods across the borders, not just selling goods in another country. Your objective should be actually how well can you integrate your economic activity with those countries. And that will have an enduring presence, that will have an enduring value, and create win-win situations. I'd like to leave a last thought with you all, that the rise of India will require its industry to also go global. And these are very, very interconnected concepts. So the industry will rise, and I'm very sure the way today Indian industry is engaged with outside world is very strong, but this footprint of the industry should even multiply outside of India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary ER, for those remarks and presentation. In fact, how do we build trust globally and how do we build a global presence has been a very strong area of discussion in this annual business meet over yesterday and even this morning. You mentioned about economic diplomacy and areas of how we work with the rest of the globe. Again, that was very strong focus of our discussion when the Honorable EAM was here yesterday morning. One of the things that we have been seeing, this trend of how cost of doing business in India is being so very well addressed through the policies which were mentioned by both the secretaries, and along with the ease of doing business or logistics, the cost of doing business is today, with the competitive rates that India have, are we are far better off. Yes, you did pose certain issues of skills and labor and technology. And technology is something which again has been a strong focus here, and there will be many coming into questions coming on with regards to that. So as you had talked about labor and referred to the Secretary Labor, again a person with whom we have worked on while she has worn many hats in the past, and even as a labor secretary, and this is one area where we are looking at a large number of reforms yet to come or to come. And how do we see that we go forward? We have also touched upon the issue besides the reforms within. We have talked about issues like migration and India being the HR sort of a hub for the rest of the globe. That has been, again, a part of the discussions. So how can we really look at the huge demographic dividend that we have to be a global talent hub, as well as through the reforms make it much easier as far as the businesses of the country to really look at engaging and employing much more, which is a responsibility we all agreed during the course of these discussions by the industry. With that, my pleasure and honor to invite Secretary Labor, Ms. Sumita Daura.
Good morning to all. Well, almost good afternoon. Very happy to be invited today to the CII's Annual Business Summit 2024. Thank you very much. We've heard a lot about manufacturing, investments, the challenges ahead. Viksit Bharat 2047 vision, inclusive growth and prosperity is a key component. As manufacturing, services, trade, logistics, infrastructure, as they expand, and as the global value chains become anchored more strongly in the country, it's very important to have adequate quality employment generation as well for reaping our demographic dividend, which was just alluded to. This is one of the fundamental requirements for achieving the vision of Viksit Bharat. What would quality employment generation require? It requires ensuring healthy and safe working conditions for the labor, universalizing the social security, higher female labor force participation, minimum wages for all, boosting domestic consumption and investment in the process, to name a few. We will need to ensure we meet international standards where quality employment generation, working conditions are concerned, and in the process also ward off any perceptions at the international level which could lead to any non-tariff barriers we may have to face at any point in time. At the same time, we need higher productivity, including labor productivity, which will attract investments. We heard Secretary DPIT talk about FDI policy, investment policy, the liberalization of the policy that has to be supported by productive labor force. This will boost production, exports of both goods and services, and thereby catalyze the growth of the economy and lead to further employment generation and put in place a virtuous cycle which is self-sustaining. So while we've looked at one aspect, I'm here to talk about the other aspect, that is the labor and employment aspect. So what has been happening in the country with respect to all the factors I just mentioned, pertaining to quality employment generation, pertaining to higher productivity and production? Well, in the field of labor reforms, keeping in view quality employment generation and with a view to align the labor laws in the country with the present economic scenario, we heard India, the fastest growing major economy in the world, 5th largest economy in the world, our GDP poised to increase further on our way to Viksit Bharat 2047. We really need to align the labor laws, many of which date back to pre-independence times, with the present economic scenario. We need to reduce the multiplicity of laws, the multiplicity of authorities, and with a view to doing all this, 29 labor laws have been consolidated into 4 new labor codes. This was done in 2019 and 2020. The Code on Wages 2019 and the other 3 codes in 2020, which cover social security, health, working conditions. They cover occupational safety and industrial relations. As I already said, 29 labor-related acts have been consolidated into 4 new codes. More than 1,200 sections have been rationalized to less than 500. About 1,400 rules have been rationalized to about 400. So that is the kind of simplification which has been put in place and passed by Parliament in 2019 and 20. What are the objectives of these reforms? As we work on the codes, what do they promote? What are the objectives? We heard Secretary DPIT say that policies need to reinforce each other. How will this reinforce the investment policy, the Make in India, the Startup India, and so on and so forth? Decriminalization, ease of doing business. Well, the labor reforms have been put in place with an eye on ease of doing business, simplification and reduction in compliance burden, decriminalization and seamless dispute resolution, promotion of labor market flexibility at the same time, enhancing female participation, leveraging technologies, and meeting the skill needs of the economy, whether at the national or international level. There are certain common provisions across all the 4 codes, which promote ease of doing business and decriminalization. I just want to give you a flavor without going into too much detail. One is that there are uniform definitions now in these 4 codes, across the codes. You'll find uniform definitions as far as feasible. There is provision for 1 registration for an establishment versus 8 separate registrations you need today. There's a single return. The inspector becomes a facilitator, so there's inspector cum facilitator. There will be web-based inspections versus jurisdictional inspection. Before initiating any legal action, opportunity for compliance is mandatory. That opportunity is being given. And imprisonment has been replaced by fines to the greatest extent. So this is about some of the examples I wanted to give for EODB and decriminalization. Most first-time offenses are compoundable under the labor codes. Then there are code-specific provisions. I will not go into that too much detail. It will become too technical. But again, to give you a flavor, many of you would have struggled with EPFO or ESIC-related procedures. I get a lot of references on what we used to call Twitter and we now call X. There are a lot of reforms which we are already bringing in, and they will continue with the labor codes, these reforms, simplification of the procedures. There will be reduced litigation burden with a single appellate authority. Thresholds will be raised with factory license, threshold being raised. Similarly, contract labor license from 20 workers to 50 workers, and pan-India, a single license for the contractor, for the contract labor, just a single license, which will be valid for 5 years instead of 1 year. And it will not be order-wise, it will be covering the whole contract. There will be deemed licensing, registration if time lapse happens without response from the authorities. So this is the kind of simplification, this is the kind of business-friendly interventions which are there under the labor reforms. As we are aware, the issue of labor and employment is tripartite. There are the employers, there are the employees, and there's the government. As I already mentioned, the codes look at putting in place safe, healthy working conditions, social security for workers, making them more productive, minimum wages will be statutory, and so on and so forth, making them more productive and more responsive. As we look towards more investments coming into the country, what will happen to the labor market in India? What about labor market flexibility? How is that addressed? First of all, there'll be a lot of flexibility, a lot of encouragement for women labor force entering the worker participation ratio. The codes will go a long way in ensuring participation of women in labor, as well as in the decision-making bodies. 1/3 members in the advisory bodies will be women, and they will give advice on women-related employment issues. This is already there in the reforms, in the codes I mentioned. There will be women's empowerment, more empowerment in the workplace, and with consent, women will be able to work in all types of establishments with their consent, again, like I said, before 6 a.m. and after 7 p.m. So this will go a long way. We were just having some conversations before this session on how women would like to work in 3 shifts continuously in many of the process industry. And this will go a long way towards promoting that. Similarly, there are a lot of other provisions, the facility of creche and so on and so forth, which will ensure benefits to women and encourage their participation. What else will happen to the labor market in India? The migrant labor, for instance, the contract labor has been defined under the codes to include interstate migrant workers. They will get a legal identity. They will be able to access benefits. Portability of benefits, formalization of labor are all part of the labor codes. Another very interesting concept I'd like to touch, that is the fixed-term employment. This is a new concept, and it is beneficial for both the employer and the employee. Fixed-term employment, for the first time, this is coming into the labor legislation. This will be an engagement of a worker based on a written contract of employment for a fixed term. Beneficial for the employer, how? Promotes ease of doing business by engaging skilled workforce for short-term period projects. Beneficial for the employee, how? They will get the benefits which will improve their living standards, which are normally given to regular workers. So this is the kind of perspective, this is the kind of reform which is already there in the labor codes, which were passed, as I already said. Coming to technology, the labor codes also look at leveraging technology. Web-based inspection system, like I already mentioned, single window portals, many of them are already in place and are being strengthened, electronic processes, and President CII mentioned about integrating data, that being a big challenge. I would like to inform you, many of you would have heard about eShram, which is a portal which already has 300 million workers from the unorganized sector already registered on eShram for various kinds of social security benefits, for skilling, access to skilling, and so on. I already mentioned about decriminalization and improvement notice being mandatory to establishments before any thought of prosecution. Timely proceedings, there are time periods fixed for disposal of the disputes of the various appeals. skill demands of industry. Reskilling fund has been envisaged under the labor code for enhancing employability of the labor. Career centers will be there instead of just a simple employment exchange, and so on. I just wanted to give you a flavor about the labor reforms, the labor codes, how they are cross-cutting across industry. They will impact trade, and we will be able to meet our benchmarks in labor productivity and productivity with respect to manufacturing, international standards, and so on and so forth. What is happening to employment and livelihoods in the country at the moment? That is a question as we go towards 2047, as we take the next steps. We heard about India being the 5th largest economy, and we are on our way to becoming the 3rd largest economy. The employment has been increasing along with the GDP growth. As per the Periodic Labor Force Survey, the PLFS, which is done annually by MOSPI, the worker population ratio, that is the workers who are actually working, age 15 years and above, it increased from about 47% in the total population in 2017-18 to 56% in 22-23. That's an increase, a substantial increase of more than 9% of employment in the last 5 years. Now, if we look at another database, we don't want to look at MOSPI, okay, let's look at the RBI's database. RBI brings out the CLEMS database, which CLEMS stands for Capital, Labor, Energy, Minerals, and Service. What does CLEMS say? CLEMS says that estimated employment in India has surged to 55 crores and more people in 21-22, compared to about 47 crore in 2017-18. This translates to more than 8 crore numbers of people in the employment opportunities workspace in the last 5 years. Now, the next CLEMS for 22-23 has yet to be released, but we have a rough estimate, which suggests that about 3 crore employment opportunities were generated in 22-23 alone. This means 11 crore employment opportunities in the last 5 years. 47 crore 2017-18, 55 plus crore in 2021-22, and in 22-23, another 3 crore. With this kind of opportunities, these kind of jobs being created, it signifies a new horizon of opportunities for our nation's youth. We want to attract global value chains. We want to have more productive labor. We want to have more skilled labor. We want labor to be more in the organized sector, to have more benefits of social security and so on. That is where it's very important for policy initiatives to support this employment generation I just spoke about, the many employment opportunities which are being generated, including on the National Career Service, where a lot of employers put vacancies. And this is maintained by our ministry, the National Career Portal. In the last 1 year, we saw a jump of more than 200% in the job vacancies which have been posted by employers on the National Career Portal, which meant 1 crore vacancies were posted in last financial year, compared to about 35 lakhs in the year before that. As I said, and I'm repeating, this signifies a new horizon of job opportunities. We need to support the labor force to be more skilled. We need to support reskilling. Industry needs to come in. All the skilling centers need to make sure that workforce of the future is prepared in India. Employment generation coupled with employability, this is the priority of the government. And a number of schemes are in place, number of policies are in place, number of flagship programs are there. We are all familiar with those. PLI, Make in India, Startup India, the startups are also generating a lot of jobs, employability, opportunities, Digital India. In the services sector, the global capacity centers, India today houses about 40% of the GCCs in the world. So all these are huge employment opportunities, skilling opportunities, but as we look towards the future, we need to keep a few aspects in mind. And what are these? To repeat myself, skilling and reskilling, labor force employability, labor market flexibility, future of work, aligning the supply side with the demand side becomes very important. So what are the jobs of the future? 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, are we preparing our demographic dividend accordingly? So that is where we are trying to bridge the gap with Ministry of Higher Education, school education, skills, and so on and so forth. Of course, industry gives a lot of feedback on that. Adoption of technology, green jobs, expanding employment opportunities is in itself a big challenge where manufacturing, services, trade, logistics, and the expanding global value chains bring a lot of opportunities. International mobility of labor, where we are developing a framework of recognition of skills and qualifications to make it easy for our labor to migrate, have established migration patterns to other countries. And lastly, aligning the demand and supply side of labor workforce, as I already mentioned, is a very important thing we need to do as we prepare for the future. Thank you very much for this opportunity and look forward to interaction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daura. One of the things that we have been talking again has been the entire area of logistics, including shipping and ports, and we've seen phenomenal area of work in this entire space, including in the waterways. And as I turn to Secretary Shipping, Ports and Waterways, I'd just like to mention about one thing which keeps coming up, Secretary, over and over again in our discussions at CII, is the lack or the cost of the entire business, when we talk about shipping from India, the cost that comes in. And of course, we keep turning to the government to say that it would be great if it can bring down that cost. We know that that's not an easy proposition because it all depends on economics and the volumes that we generate from India. So how do we really get is there a way that we will move at some point in time to our own shipping lines? And how can, even another area that we talked about was how can the Sagarmala, say for instance, project which is so very well done, how can that get sort of integrated? And we talked just now about the industrial policy. That would be good to hear from you and your remarks. And after that, of course, we'll get a couple of questions in.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to all my colleagues and, of course, the CIA President, on the Director General on the days. Namaskar. I have a very the boring thing called the PPT. Let's see if we can have it loaded. Take a few minutes. I'm coming from a function celebrating women in Maritime Day today. And glad to tell you that we now have 13,000 women, taking off from where Sumita just left. We have 13,000 women seafarers of India working across the world. And that was just a few hundred a decade back. So I think that's a bigger percentage than for instance, the percentage of women in this hall. So I think we must compliment ourselves on that. And the other context which was mentioned by Mr. Banerjee was Chabahar. So we've had, the whole week has been Chabahar week, as you might have seen. We had Chabahar, then we had the response to Chabahar, then we had the response to Chabahar, and then we had the response to Chabahar. So this has been going on, and I think this is a vital and excellent example of how governments work and how we all work together. And without MEA, and without DPIIT, we could not have done this. And so kudos, of course, I must congratulate all of us that we were able to pull it off, but it represents how this business of whole of government approach works. I often say that to have a whole of government approach, you need firstly a whole of ministry approach. And within the ministry, we have dozens of organizations, so you need a whole of organization approach. And of course, many of you are industry leaders and you know how verticals operate within organizations. And we also have experience of talking to some industries, and then they tell you that, look, this is not handled by my division, it's handled by someone else, right? So working together is a challenge for all of us. But suffice it to say that in government, I think we have really embraced this concept of working together, whole of government approach, and at least in our ministry, the whole of ministry approach. And connecting dots is, I think, what all of us are doing at the top level. And the PM Gati Shakti is an example of that. The integrated approach to everything, whether it is logistics, policy, trade, investment, competitiveness, everything is done together. So we have groups of secretaries, we have groups of ministers. All of them are in the business of ensuring that whatever is done, whether it's ease of doing business, speed of doing business, or cost of doing business, all of them are done together. I call them EODB, SODB, and CODB. Now, coming to shipping, basically how we have increased the efficiency in shipping sector is actually ports, shipping, and waterways. Some glimpse of that within the time available. So we will look at institutional structures, we will look at financing, the processes and systems that have been put in place, the data and the monitoring that is important for that for the purpose, the policies and regulations, the infrastructure and assets, and finally, what we have done in HR. Of course, I will not be able to touch upon all of them today, maybe one or two of them. So this is the maritime sector, where which is basically the one that empowers trade. And of course, we are very we don't preen too much because nobody knows much about us, except maybe most of you. The public doesn't know much about shipping because we have a very little public interface. But I was glad to see that in The Economist I think last week, there was an article which talked about the ports and how they have improved over the last decade. And I thought that was a very positive article. So we have 12 major ports, and we have a huge capacity. We have a lot of shipbuilding yards. And of course, the national waterways. We had 5 national waterways earlier. We now have 111 waterways. And please do look at how waterways can be used, because that is one of the most environmentally friendly as well as cheaper alternative to the other modes, which is rail and road. So from rail to road to water, the movement in terms of cost is several percentage below. I mean, several tens of percentages below. So you can look at that shift, which is happening with, like you say, like I've shown there, 38% CAGR. The evaluation of the marine ecosystem, I'm showing you this because it looks at how we have grown in the last 10 years. 102% increase in the major port capacity, 262% in the annual cruise passengers, 18.44% increase in the cargo handled by the waterways, from 6 million tons to 134 million tons, and 121% seafarers increase, including the one that I talked about, the women going up to 13,000, 150 increase in the value of operationalized PPPs, 40,000 crores. Of course, RE, and then ship carrying capacity and increase in lighthouse tourism, which is an aside. Next, oh sorry. Then enhancing the EODB, the things that we've done in terms of policy, we've reformed the Major Ports Act, the Marine Aids to Navigation Act, the Inland Vessels Act, and we have made changes in the model concession agreements, because that is the interface where the private sector is most interested, and we ensured that we change the MCAs in order to make them more private sector friendly, banking friendly, investment friendly. And now we have 35 PPPs. JNPA has become the first port in the country to become 100% PPP. So all terminals there are operated by private sector. So it's a landlord model, and we want to shift to a 80% landlord model by the end of this decade. And the other things that you can see there, they're all bills that are in the offing. And the other principles that I should highlight the market-determined tariff. Earlier we had, it was a regulator-determined tariff. Now we have entirely market-determined tariff in the ports. Then the ease of doing business, improvements in financing, and the other things that we have put in place to ensure that we have a more business-friendly ecosystem. The four key areas that I'll touch upon is one, developing port-based industrial clusters, because this is where the cost of logistics plays out. Now, a lot of people think that if you improve shipping, logistics costs will go down. But shipping is only one part of the value chain. It's the entire value chain away after the ports is one part, but shipping and the roads, the railway network, a lot of other things also play a part in the cost of doing business. So the first thing is ports-based industrial clusters. The next one is investment into the maritime sector. Third is ensuring PPPs. And fourth is ensuring multimodality. So these are four pillars on which we are working. And so I'll just briefly touch upon each of them. The first one, as I said, is developing 4 port-based industrial clusters. Now, all of you know whether it is Jebel Ali or the Shenzhen or Rotterdam, a lot of them work on the principle of bringing the industry near the port so that the logistic costs are reduced. Now, in India, at least the nearest industrial cluster is on an average around 200 to 300 kilometers away from the ports. Unlike China, where it is just 10 to 20 or maximum about 30 to 40 kilometers. So this has an important role to play in the cost of logistics. So that is one thing that we are trying in India also. And for this, we are looking at 3 things. One is land. The second thing is the development of the maritime industrial cluster. And the third is a set of promotions and incentives which can then be made available to all the industries setting up shop there. And I'm glad to tell you that since I was earlier in Tuticorin, and we worked with state governments also, and often we end up giving a single basket of incentives to the customer, to the investor. And this has been very successful. At least I've seen it in Tuticorin. And recently, we had an auction of land for hydrogen. And 3,000 plus acres of land were auctioned and were taken up by 12 different industries in Kandla. Similarly, half a dozen in Tuticorin. So there is a lot of appetite and there is availability, and we can make land available to the industries wherever required, if only we are told what is required. So on the land policy initiatives, one is the pricing. We have gone in for a pricing model which is absolutely competitive. And like I said, though our so-called reserve rate was just 28,000 rupees, actually the land was lapped up at something like 6 lakhs to 11 lakhs. So which means, number one, the industry has a lot of money. And number two, there is a lot of appetite for land, there's a lot of competition. So may the best person win. So that's how the land pricing, though we reduced it, there's a lot of demand. Then land lease tenures. So we made that also very, we've increased the lease tenures from 30 to 60. We can also increase it to 99 if required. But all these things are dependent on what the industry wants. Then the land allotment. The allotment is again application-based, made very simple and through an interface which is digital. Then the other options which are being looked at for promoting port-based clusters include co-development models, PPP models, and SPV models where we have a revenue share. So I'll not go into the details, but these are all policies that we are looking at. Then the single window, of course, I talked about this. And of course, incentive packages to attract industries which look at SEZ-like incentive policies, investment-linked incentives, expenditure-linked incentives, employment subsidies, and so on. So this is an entire basket of incentives that is being looked at. Then coming to the second area, that is boosting investment and investing capital, infusing capital. Now here we are looking at what is called the Maritime Development Fund. We've been working on this for the last 6 months, and this fund, basically shipping in India, the port sector is well funded. All the ports, the major ports which are under the government, we made a profit of about 7,000 crores last year on an overall revenue of about 20,000 crores. So, which is, I'm sure you will agree, it's a good margin to have. And operating ratio is about 42%, 40%. So, which is remarkable. So, money is not a concern in the port sector. Infrastructure is not a funding is not a concern in the port sector. But in shipping, we are in the entire shipping, we are just 1%, we make only 1% of the ships in the world. We own 1.4% of ships in the world. We spend $75 billion in leasing ships to carry out trade, imports and exports. So this is a very a situation which needs change. Therefore, we are looking at the entire value chain in shipping. And shipping, because it's not part of the infrastructure sector, there are issues of tenure, there are issues of interest rates and so on. So we are trying to create a fund which will take care of this problem. So entire value chain, financing, insurance, ownership, leasing, arbitration, chartering, registration, then manning, management, crewing, and then of course building, repairs, recycling. The entire chain I know this by heart by now because there are about 12 of them. So we are working on all these areas, and for that we need financing, and that is what we are trying to put up. It will be part equity, government-funded equity, part foreign-funded equity, and part debt. Hopefully, when this is announced, this will be a good initiative which will help the shipping industry to take off, and hopefully we will not be 1% of the world's shipping being built in India, but much more than that. And then the third thing is promoting private trade and investments through PPPs, about which I talked and I don't have time, so I'll just skip this. Then PPP is of course doing very well. And finally, promoting seamless trade through enhanced multimodality, which I talked about. The Gati Shakti project is just that. When Sumita ji was in the Gati Shakti ministry and in the DPIIT, so she used to call me almost every week and say that, look, the railways are doing this, the roads are doing this, what about you? So this integration is happening not only at the infrastructure level, but also at the process level. There's a lot of work more needed. For instance, when we talk to cruise lines across the world, they told us that, look, infrastructure is okay, we are building so many cruise terminals across the country, but we need to do something on process, on customs, on immigration, because the cruise passenger has very little time. He just comes in and leaves. But he comes and spends a lot of money. So we need to ensure that the transition is seamless. So we have worked out schemes where we sit with customs, where we sit with immigration, and all the other authorities to ensure that there is absolutely seamless transition, not just in goods, but also in passengers, cruise tourists, and so on. So finally, I'd just like to, again, thank CII for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about shipping. We are hoping that apart from shipping and ports, the waterways sector, again, another huge sector, now many projects coming up in Kerala, Goa, Orissa, Gujarat, Mumbai, Calcutta, Guwahati, Varanasi. I mean, you take it, everywhere we are establishing presence, and we want to do green vessels. Again, another huge investment opportunity. Green vessels meaning electric. 2 of them were launched in Ayodhya, Varanasi this year. One hydrogen vessel was launched in Cochin again this year. And 1,000 vessels is what we are looking at, greening 1,000 vessels over the next 10 years. New vessels, apart from converting, retrofitting vessels in the inland waterway sector, building terminals, etc. I mean, the scope is huge. And we think that we are moving towards the blue economy. We will call ourselves a blue economy, where we will expand the scope and the functioning of the ministry to include areas like seabed mining, etc. Of course, that is still in the works. But a lot of interesting things happening, and thank you, CII, for giving me this opportunity to share with you about some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Secretary. Thanks. One of the things that came out very clearly was teamwork between the ministries. Each one of them referred to the others and how they have collaborated. Large number of issues addressed. I know that time is limited, but I wanted a quick sort of response from all our 4 secretaries in the next few minutes that we have. On one question, reforms we've seen happening. Lots of steps taken by you. DPIIT Secretary spoke about the ease of doing business. Secretary ER, you touched upon areas like linking up with the world, exports, and I've come to the shipping secretary because that relates to the work happening in terms of in the states on ports. It's through the ports that exports takes place, and the role of states on the exports, and of course labor codes that you mentioned, Secretary Labor. All of this requires a lot to do with the states. And so how do we take such great work that all of you have done as a team and as your ministries, how do we see that percolating and being actioned in the states, in the reforms that are so much required from the states? The story of India is now in the states of India. So quick responses from all the 4 secretaries, please, if possible. Starting with Secretary DPID, please.
Okay, so to the extent that the reform relates to legislative domains that belong to the states, the only way you can get them to carry out those reforms is through a process of incentivizing them, sometimes with funding as well, but usually by what we call what I referred to earlier in my address, that is the state ranking framework for ease of doing business. We create these action plans every year, what we call the Business Reform Action Plan. We rank the states based on those indices. And usually, because the ranking framework is so politically sensitive for the chief ministers, that most of them do respond quickly to any indices that may show them in a poor light. And I would say that many of those reforms that you see, particularly during the COVID years, we saw things like online, water and power connections, inspection systems that are randomized and not done on a discretionary basis. All those came during those periods. But from time to time, Government of India has also used the carrot of additional funding. During the COVID years, additional borrowing limits were made available to states, up to 0.5% of their GDP for carrying out reforms in areas like the power sector. We also gave them money, give them money at times through this special central assistance, that 50-year loan for capital assistance, where also access is sometimes linked, has been linked in the past to reform measures that they take. So yeah, I mean, there are, some, हमारे पास कुछ हथियार हैं, I would say, but they are not, those hatiyars are not, are a mix of incentives and money. And sometimes the ranking framework, it's not, obviously it's not something that we can, hammer it into them, but yeah, there are some weapons that we have to, nudge them in the reform areas that we, feel are really important for the country.
You nudge them for the weapons for a greater teamwork, Secretary, is the message that we take. And thank you very much, and move to Secretary ER.
Yeah, thank you, Banerjee. What's a couple of ideas I'd like to supplement here. One of which is I feel it's very important to have a reform which is a continuous process. It's not a one-time reform in the government. But that reform also, the input has to come from the industry. It should be a thrust and a push coming from the industry. Will have a lot more strength in it, rather than the government itself is telling what is right for you. The one. Second thing is, reform, usually it appears to be that the central government is making laws and everybody else will have to follow. But I think it's really important that the state governments are also sensitive to it, because most of the manufacturing is happening at the local level and in the states. So when you make, for example, the investment policies, then the state government should also be aligned with that investment policy, and they should also respect and honor that policy. Second thing is the predictability. Of course, RK, my colleague and friend, said about the low tariffs we have to be prepared in future. Absolutely, that's given. I think as you grow, as you want to be competitive, you need to have a low tariff. But I think more important, equally important, I must say, is actually predictability and stability in your tariff policy. That's very important for competitiveness. And the last thing I want to leave a thought with the industry is, be long-term in your approach. You got to be long-term in the way you want to do your economic activity. plug in. I think calculated risk is equally important and it's very strategic. We are all there to assist you. Our Ministry of External Affairs, all of Government of India, and more importantly, our ambassadors and high commissioners are with you in this. Thank you.
Very beautifully put by both of you, and I'll turn to the Labour Secretary because that's a very, very key area of state-level reforms as we go along.
Yeah, thank you. And as we are aware, labor is a concurrent subject. When it comes to labor reforms, the states have been playing a very active role, and number of sections the states have to notify. And today, most of the states have already brought out their draft rules. So they have a role in policy, notification of the rules, making sure there's harmonization of standards across the states, so that industry doesn't have to face differences in rules when they go from one state to another. That is where the Government of India also steps in and handholds. Then from the local level, in the states, the local level governments, when it comes to implementation, when it comes to facilitating the supply side of labor, whether it is education, vocational courses, skilling, onboarding, social security schemes, the states have a very important role to play, a very critical role, and then monitoring the implementation, feedback, and improving so that we are able to deliver both facilitation of investments through the policy, the rules, and so on and so forth, and also the supply side, and look after, make sure that the social security standards and welfare standards for labor are met. So it has to be a whole of government approach truly across the ministries and of course in a federal system, working very closely with the states and the local governments. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Secretary. Over to you, Secretary.
Just to say that, it can be at 3 levels. It can be legal, it can be institutional, and it can be financial. So at the legal level, the major ports are within the ambit of the central government, and there are non-major ports. So we don't call them minor ports, we call them non-major because some of them are bigger than the major ports. So the non-major ports, or even better, other than major ports. These are all constitutional niceties. So they are called all other than major ports. So those are actually under the state governments. So today we have 12 major ports, but there are 214 other than major ports. And they are doing phenomenally well, and they are doing 46%, and most of them are under the control of the state government maritime boards, and they come under the concurrent list. So so legally it's all very clear. Shipping is again open to private, so there is no problem. Inland waterways, again the jurisdiction, the Inland Waterways Act very clearly specifies who should do what. Again, there is no issue. So that's the legal picture. On the institutional side, we have created certain institutional mechanisms like the Maritime State Development Council, the Inland Waterways State Development Council, and now the state level Maritime and Inland Waterway Transport Councils, where we meet often and we ensure that things are sorted out. And finally, finance. And like Mr. Singh said, the financial carrots are always useful. So there are, Sagarmala schemes under which we fund certain programs, and there is always some give and take on that. So based on that, we ensure that we are all on the same page.
Thank you. Back to President Dinesh.
Thank you. Just to great session, great inputs, great thoughts. I think the one takeaway I'm hearing from all of you is that it's not going to be a single one-point contact, but it is going to be all of you working together to create the combination of all these policies. So I think look forward to working with you from CII side on this. Thank you for I would call it education and interesting discussion we had today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
President, before we wind up, may I request you to hand over a token of appreciation to each of our secretaries who are with us this afternoon. And request all of you to stand together for a photo op, please. Ladies and gentlemen, with that we close the session. Our next session will start right away. Request you all to remain seated, please. Thank you.